I want to show you something because I've been working on your stuff. So I was looking at your videos, and I can stand
Oh,
this
wow.
to you. And I was looking at points of convergence because I'm really interested in what you're doing, and I'm very excited. And I was trying to think, how can I help you with this? So it's very interesting. You know, the mix of music and if you want to call it clowning, I don't know, performance, clowning, and all that stuff is really exciting. So, so yeah, so I've got some core concepts that you kept coming up in your conversations, and especially the last conversation you had on the roof there, on the rooftop, was really exciting.
Ah.
Okay, that's the last one on there. Yeah, we've had, I think, at least 2 other conversations, or if not 3. It's just it's not published yet, but
And I looked at your websites and your work, and I'm really excited about your work and what you do. It's very different. So I mean, I'm you know, I always like doing this. I'm also an artist myself. So I mean, I'm a painter by trade. Although these days, but I also teach. You know, I teach artists, and I also taught art teachers, and also artists who want to go and teach in universities. So and I did a lot of work which would explain this road. I did a lot of work, especially in Britain, where we do PhDs by practice. Well, the art practice is a PhD. So it's not the DMA like the Doctor of Music Art.
I actually have one of those PhDs.
You have one of
them. Yeah.
And I work also with Portuguese colleagues in Porto who do the very interesting PhDs by practice there. So the whole idea of working with practitioners and also working on the idea of practice-based research and practice as research and all that stuff, which you're familiar with. That's where I come from. And also link a lot with philosophy. So my work, if you look at my website, I did a lot of work on art, philosophy, and education. So I bring them together. So at the moment, I'm working on Giambattista Vico. I'm writing a small book for students, which links with the whole idea of what we know is what we make, or rather, what we make is what we know. So it's knowing through making. So that's at the moment where I am.
Great.
Yeah. So I'll stop talking.
No. I mean, how do you have any? How do we tackle this at first?
I mean, if you tell me where you are at the moment, because you've got some really nice ideas on the rooftop, you came up with some really practical ideas of how you're going to do this, whether you can kind of, the idea of soundscapes, for example, the whole idea of collecting all these soundscapes, and then how Kira, is it Kira? Yeah, how Kira kind of works with that as well, with videos and all that stuff. I mean, that's really exciting. So, I mean, we can have a conversation around that, and then I can throw you, I mean, for example, I can just tell you this. I mean, what was interesting is that some key concepts that came up was when you were talking about your own work, and you talked about groundedness, for example. And then I can think, how about ungrounding the groundedness? But also you were thinking, and especially when Jonas was talking about how he came into music. Also, he is grounded in classical training, but also he's a composer, so he goes out of that, kind of pushes the envelope in there. But then Kira was talking about clowning, but also she was talking about the whole idea of her parents and how she was influenced by her parents. But the idea of clowning is very exciting for me because I'm very fond of the work of Dario Fo.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And the whole idea of the giullare. But also with Dario Fo is interesting because then you started talking in another point about revolution. But you have this Baltic connection, and the revolution in the Baltics obviously is different from the Soviet Revolution, which is the traditional notion of what is, you know, we had the French Revolution, Soviet Revolution, and now we have the revolutions, the Baltics in the 90s, but now we have different kinds of, so the idea of, you were talking about how there's an algorithm and how revolution could be the algorithm, and the idea of the universalism and 10001 and all that stuff. I mean, I could connect them all, and I could see how this whole thing is connected. And when you then came out with the whole idea of the soundscape and how your presence, even going out of the internet and meeting physically, which is interesting, and how that suddenly the city itself becomes the venue for the soundscape. To me, that's where you're hitting something there, which is really exciting in terms of how this connects, but also connects counterintuitively, as I said in my email I sent you, because I like the idea of, because, you know, you could go the easy way and say, okay, I'll compose some music and you perform to it and that's it. But I mean, that's intuitive. I mean, the counterintuitive side of it, how do you kind of belabor, push this, take it somewhere else, tear it apart, and then bring it together in a different way? That's what I was thinking. And you know, the whole idea of humor, the whole idea of spontaneity, but also the issue of the Baltic, and you both having those kind of connections also by family and birth, is exciting to me, because the notion of revolution today in 2020 is very different from any idea of the revolution as we used to think about it in a different way. So that's why I mentioned Dario Fo, because of his work on the left, but also how he became much more marginalized in there. You know, his work on, you know, the accidental death of the anarchists and all sorts of other things. But he makes a lot of references, which are very interesting. There's a whole play, actually, which is based on America, which is interesting as well. But anyway, but I just mentioned that as a reference for me to make those connections.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to hear you talk about, because again, we've had, I think, at least 2-3 more meetings that we've also recorded since that rooftop. It's actually really interesting to hear our past thoughts in perspective to what we've been talking about now.
Yeah,
it's actually exactly. Like, oh yeah, where we've gotten now is different for what we talked about, like on the rooftop, for example. But now it's like, oh, but maybe we can rethink about what we used to talk about, because it was interesting. Yeah. Kiara, what, you were gonna say something?
No, it was also like getting to know each other, like shooting in every direction, like where are like points of interest that could collide. Yeah, but to me, actually, clowning in general is like a individual revolution that's like a lifelong commitment. Like, yeah. Huh.
I think.
So clowning is important, because the only way, I think actually we've got, all the tools have been taken away from us, especially in politics. And the only way to do it is to really not make fun and, make fun, but also use irony and use all that stuff. In fact, actually, if you're interested, I can send you a paper I wrote about Dario Fo, about this, in terms of how these are narratives which actually are empowering us. You know, if you think about politicians today, if you ridicule them, they really, really don't like it. And that's where I think there's a lot of that. But I'm not sure whether you want to make this political in terms of political with a small p, if you like, or whether you want to take it somewhere else. So it's up to you.
No, actually, no. In terms of humor and revolution, I think just that one note is that these days, and at least in the United States, and seems like all of us are staying in the United States, this is where I really miss European mentality, because I believe there is something about a certain, maybe because as generations we are much older, like I feel like with my father and his friends, when I call and I tell them what's happening in the US, there is always a moment where we laugh about it a lot. Like, of course, first they are very concerned, then we go over all the scary and bad things, and then we have to mock it. And I feel like it's almost like with all of my European friends, we have to always mock it. But you also can see every movement that comes from Europe, no, let's say Dada, it's always like it's in the middle of something like a sweeping moment in human history, and then it's mockery and humor always and I feel right now, at least on social media and in general, like in these collective forums, humor is like really feared. Like, God forsake, you're gonna throw in a joke like towards any current issue. It's gonna, like, I don't know, maybe it's really about nuances, and I wonder if American mentality or culture will ever accept nuances, which is, I think it's really a base of humor. And it's, I think for Europeans, both, I think artists and thinkers, it's a bit of a trap. If nuances don't exist, suddenly you have to only paint like bold and basic colors. And it really saddens me a lot. But yeah, I don't know.
No, but also there's this dimension within the United States itself. I mean, I'm used more to New York, but since 2016 I got a job in the Midwest, I didn't know what hit me here, because it's a very different approach.
Huh.
And then I even had friends to tell me how, for example, I mean, I mean, I remember when I moved from Britain to America, I had a colleague, a student of mine who came with me, but he was American. And he told me, John, certain jokes, you can't tell them here. And this was New York City. So, I mean, there are certain things of how you approach religion, philosophy, well, anything. So you have to be careful, gender, for example, and all that stuff. But then I thought I learned how to deal with this. But then coming to coming to the Midwest is even different. So I mean, I can imagine. And now I think with the Trump era, we know this is becoming more and more polarized. So I mean, there is that. But I mean, being in New York, as I was saying, telling Jonas, actually, I was in New York. You know, I was at home in the summer. The approach to the whole thing with is different from, say, for example, the Midwest. So there are still people here who don't believe that this is real, or people who don't want to wear masks, even young ones. And then there are the young ones who are coming in, the students. And so there is that kind of, but I mean, obviously the humor thing is not something you rely on. Even though some of the best shows on American TV are humorous ones, you know, the Saturday Night Live and all that stuff, that's different. And some people would say that's the real news. We should watch that rather than the other news. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. But I mean, I doubt, I'm not sure whether that's something to do with New York, whether it's something to do with cosmopolitanism, something to do. And this is the project which takes me back to the whole idea. Because you said something which was interesting. You were talking about American films are always on cue, things, stuff like that. I put on cue. But then you said something about the Russian post-Soviet news as coming only with conclusions. And I think that those two are really interesting points in what you are doing. The whole idea of being somewhere, either being on cue or just not just accepting conclusions. So that space in between is really interesting.
I actually, as far as humor goes, I mean, it sounds like we're talking more about humor within the entire world context, like different social, political, cultural context. But I feel that even within smaller communities that we're in, like for example, me in being more classical music, avant-garde music, contemporary music field, and I think also maybe in the art field, there is certainly, and that's partly why I love working with Kira, because she has a totally different take on it, but humor has a different stigma. Like, it's quote unquote, I guess, more serious often. It's sometimes I think it's not understood. The humor in the work isn't understood because they think it's serious. And I think I've certainly struggled with that in my own music, even because like most of music, like purely instrumental music I know that's very funny to me tends to be something that's much more spontaneous, more jazz, improvised music, stuff that is improvised in some form. There's very little, like even with mainstream classical works like Beethoven, Mozart, like there's certainly, they wrote humorous moments into the music, but at least in today's context, they're not laugh out loud moments. So I don't know, it's just interesting that we talk about the stigma of humor within like America and Europe, but I feel like there's even a stigma within the art worlds. And that's something I'm kind of interested in, I don't know, shattering, exploring. I'm not saying nobody's done this before, and don't get me wrong, obviously people have challenged this notion, but I feel the audience is often that we deal with, I don't know if it's an understanding, but it's definitely like a perception that is, they have a different expectation of humor. And they're very, it's actually very, they have, often the audience is very unsettled or uneasy about when to laugh and when not to laugh.
Oh yeah. It's just
sorry. No, but that is actually where I found myself over the past few months. Like, I think quarantine itself from March to June has been isolating, but it was also refreshing. It was almost like literally refreshing because the air got fresher in New York, but also it was refreshing to just suddenly cut out social life and focus at home. But then with Black Lives Matter movement and with all the rhetorics on social media, that is when I felt isolated, because suddenly even between us three, and we shouldn't go there at all, but suddenly there is a certain like lid on top of everything you say, and you have to dance really carefully around your words, which I don't remember that with the artists from the 70s or 80s in New York. You could have said something entirely wrong, and you could have slipped and apologized and went over. Now this will be a social suicide. If you suddenly, God forsake, said something where you're not aware of or whatever, like you could actually have an army of liberal enthusiasts cutting off your skull, like for like that little whatever big joke that you made. And that is awful, I think, because this is the way I feel. Like I was born in Soviet Union still, and I was raised the first time, like my kindergarten was literally kind of a small concentration camp, like where with all of them bullying and like eating your own vomit type of stuff. Like, and I feel there was that constraint where like you had to be the same way. And now it's like even more.
Yeah.
I think what, oh wow, I'm losing my voice.
No, it's okay.
I think, yeah, wow, that actually, I think that really hurts me a lot. That's why I'm losing my voice, because I think, in my opinion, I live in a country which is very like full of freedoms. And suddenly I feel so much more constrained than even in like post-Soviet Lithuania. And I think the root of it all is the loss of humor.
Yeah. I think also the parameters are different, but because you talk about liberal, even you say liberal, if you go to Europe, you say liberal is a different thing. So, I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Liberal is, I mean, I would say blame the liberals, but if I say that, people would think I'm a conservative, but actually in America, but actually it's not that. It's to do with looking at things in a very superficial way, where, as Jonas was saying, I mean, I you know, when I was young and I did my doctorate, I was obsessed with Adorno. So therefore, this whole idea of Schomburg and all that stuff, but also with Lukács. But and so basically, I did the whole dissertation about the whole idea, because I wrote it in the 90s when the whole thing was falling apart with the Berlin Wall falling. But I mean, one of the things which I managed to do is revisit some of the polemics that was happening even between Marxists and Hegelians about realism and about that and modernity. And one of the things which I found also recently, I read how when the emigres from you know, left and they came and they went to California, Brecht wrote about them actually, and he made fun of them because he said these people are too serious. But also I'm thinking of music, you know, avant-garde music, and I always find people like Schomburg too serious, whereas I find people like Stravinsky as very, very kind of funny and jocular. And I think it is true that that sense of humor in music and also in the arts. I mean, if you think about Picasso, how funny he was politically incorrect, irreverent. He did all sorts of strange things which are not very, very exemplary. But his work was full of fun. It was full of critique, and it was very powerful. And I think now that they're becoming too serious, and we're taking away humor from that stuff, whether it's in the visual arts or in music, or it's like, it's really, so I'm very happy, for example, that on Netflix they're putting Babylon Berlin, just to think of what was happening in the Weimar Republic, for example. And I don't think we have, they keep saying this is the repetition of the 30s, but I don't think we have that humor in the 30s. We don't have that freedom. Even though we have a lot of freedom in, you know, LGBTQ and all that stuff, and women's rights and whatever, it seems that we lost the humor on our way. And that's bad, because that could actually come back to bite us. And these freedoms would become like religion. So it becomes like self-righteous people.
Exactly.
It's problematic. And I mean, you know, I'm traditionally always see myself on the left, but now I get scared of self-righteous artists or self-righteous lefties. And I get scared of them, and I understand now why some people on the right then attack the other. So, but I think we need to kind of rethink this very seriously, because actually with the lack of humor, I'm not sure whether I'm deviating here, but I think if your project is going to focus on humor, this would be quite an interesting way of looking at it. But it would have to be counterintuitive. So, I mean, you might expect people who would criticize you for that, but that's fine, you know. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I think the idea of soundscapes, whatever they are, and all the differences that there are, including things which may be offensive sometimes, could be quite interesting. And recently, actually, Chomsky and a lot of others have written a letter about this because there was someone who's been attacked unfairly about something like that. I think it was the J.K. Rowling, and I saw a big letter on that. And there's a lot of polemical stuff going on about this, of how far we can go. But I think if you throw in the humor thing, that could really be a catalyst for the discussion at least, and could open up a lot of things, especially with COVID and post-COVID, whatever that's going to look like. So,
like to throw in a position of a clown as a political position.
Yeah, the giullare, which Dario Fo used to talk about, you know. And
Yeah.
They said, look at you, what you've done. You've given the Nobel Prize now to this buffoon. And they were looking at him like, what the hell is he talking about? So, yeah.
No, every culture would assimilate the position of a clown from, you know, like the position of a shaman is the same as a clown. Like it's always an outside element that's inside of the society and outside of it.
Yeah.
And I always thought, and in the ideal world, art in general is that place.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't serve the politics, it doesn't serve any kind of political positions. It actually always serves something outside and inside, to me. And like actually in school where I teach in Sweden, that's where we try to kindle it as much as possible. And I imagine only in Sweden you can really stand for something like that, the art that belongs to art.
Yeah, I have colleagues in Norway, they do that as well. So
exactly, that's what I mean. And I don't mean Sweden alone, but I did have like a very heated discussion back in New York after my Swedish recharge, where I think I presented this position that art could also serve art as a kind of inside and outside element, and I was accused of being privileged with this kind of idea. And I was like, okay, fine. Then art should also go to,
because this project is bringing Europeans in New York. So I think
also, yeah,
that kind of bridge, you know, because we all know that there is a contrast there, and I mean, in 15 years, I try to understand how the Americans think, but even that is not enough because you can't say Americans, how New Yorkers think, how Californians think, how Midwesterners think. I mean, even in New York itself, Brooklynites would be different from, say, I don't know, people in Harlem.
Midtown. Yeah. We could actually summarize how how let's say cultural Americans are afraid. How do you think? I don't know.
Wait, can you clarify a little bit?
No, I'm just kidding. Like that fear is a bit more clear to me than how they think.
Yeah.
No, but it's just very interesting to hear your perspective. I know maybe it does relate directly or indirectly to our project, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, my role could collect, is that I throw in these ideas, but also I would love to know exactly, especially if you said you've done videos after that rooftop meeting. I would love to know that, because that conversation you had in the rooftop was really, to me, apart from the fact that it looked really beautiful. I mean, I think I tried to guess where that is in Manhattan, but I mean, the conversation was really nice. And then how it went onto the street and there was that protest there. So, I mean, in and of itself, that's already something which really I think they're getting onto something here.
Yeah, we actually did.
Yeah.
I think even after that conversation was filmed, we got to something quite satisfying. Remember, Jonas?
Yeah, no, it's actually really interesting again, because like we started going somewhere else in many ways. Like we started talking about like what will the outcome of what's the more materialistic outcome of this project. Like we started talking about different mediums, I suppose, of what this could look like. But then I feel like recently we've lost sight on what maybe the content or the core material we're using in order to create. Like what we've talked about lately is podcasts, some kind of audio work that has purely audio, and we're not quite sure. We've talked about different structures and different mediums of that, but like either having a narrative, but also having the ability almost to make like a feature film, but with audio, like a film with audio, just all sonically created and manipulated in a way as well to tell a message or a story or an aesthetic, creating that. And I think definitely part of it grew out of the soundscapes idea. But I feel like we started talking a lot about, like we started narrowing in on what the outcome of the medium of the work is. But it's actually really interesting to hear what grabbed your attention as far as the content or the themes that we were playing with, because I feel like we haven't talked about that as much lately.
Well, I mean, I don't know, but because I was thinking also, I think Kira was saying some things, I could do this and I could do that. And I kept thinking, oh, that would be interesting because I mean, I've listened to some of your music, but then I thought if you do soundscapes and you bring this kind of montage of sounds and noises that you hear from in New York City. And I mean, New York is the locus of these projects now. So, but also the whole idea of when New York was not functioning as such, it was different. And it is already different. I mean, going into the subway, which is clean, which is quiet. It's a very eerie. I was quite emotional the first time I went back into the subway. I have to say this. I got really emotional, and I felt, oh, this is wonderful. Because New York is a very strange place. You feel that New York is your home, and wherever you leave it, you never leave it. It's going to be with you, and it's very hard to leave New York. I can tell you that. I keep going back to it, and I've heard about this. Like there's this feeling that the first time you want to go to New York. I don't know whether you had the same feeling when you went there first time. I don't know whether, I think Jonas you were brought up there as a young person, but
no, I actually moved to New York about last November.
Okay, so yeah. First when you go there, at first you say, what the hell is this place? I don't know. I mean, you get scared. At least my experience was, first I was very scared, and I thought, well, I don't really like it. It took me 2 years, and then suddenly something clicks, and you say, I can't leave this place now. This is it. I can't imagine a world without it. So, and I think it's the cosmopolitanism of it, but it's also the noises of it, the place, the architecture, the whole idea, that kind of history which you find yourself in it, even if you don't know about it. And I was thinking, when you were saying, look, I mean, we're going to do the soundscapes and everything, and then I kept thinking, how are you going to bring in some of the conversations that you had before, and the ones we're having now, like, the idea of a kind of, I would call it jocularity. There's a playfulness to it. And the playfulness could be also, humorous, but it's also spontaneous. Because that's bringing these kind of elements in, but also the whole idea, going back to the idea of the revolution, but the revolution of the 21st century and how is that played, could be interesting. So I don't know. And I wouldn't personally, I don't know, but maybe you can call me a formalist at this point. If I was in the Soviet Union, I would be probably in jail for being a formalist. Bourgeois formalist. But I'm thinking about if you let the form or what you're doing becoming the content, and you let it lead you at some point, and then you can control it later. Maybe that would indicate what sort of narrative content story you're telling, if there is just one story, because I think there are various lines and layers of stories here going on. But also the performativity of it. I would love to see, I mean, given, Kira's performative, kind of bodily I looked at your website and I was really fascinated by the stuff you do with professionals. I mean, last 3 years, between 2016 and 2019, I was doing an administrative job in the university, senior executive director of one of the divisions. And it drove me bananas because I'm a professor. But I kept thinking about this, how you work with professionals, how you get this performative stuff with professionals. And it was in the arts, so I mean, it kept me alive. But on the other hand, now I'm back as a professor and that's it. So, I mean, but I like that kind of, I kept thinking about it, what you do and how you coach people and all that stuff with the body, especially, and how people inhabit the body. And I'm not very much a person who can kind of perform in front of people. I wouldn't know because I find myself sloppy. But I kept thinking about music, city, body, how people become corporeal in that situation and what happens there. If you throw these elements in, I don't know what will happen. But I think what you were talking about and what I've seen, there are some really interesting ingredients there, which would be, it's a bit like cooking. If you say, I have these ingredients, I've never combined them together, what would happen?
Yeah.
Might not taste nice at the end, but that's fine. It's just, just experimenting. So
yeah, that's
I don't know whether that helps, but
No, I mean, I think it's actually really refreshing to kind of, I guess, because yeah, we started off by just kind of getting to know each other, finding different, because we didn't know each other at all.
Mm-hmm.
We do come from artistically, medium wise, from different backgrounds. Kira hasn't performed as a musician really, except did one
No.
music video that you said.
Yeah, I
Just
don't
insane.
think I'm going much into that direction
And
soon again.
my kind of theatrical performance is quite limited, even though I've taken some classes. And so, but we were kind of shooting all over the place for good reason, and it's really good to hear that there are ingredients being identified, some of them which we have maybe lost sight on in some form. So I think it's actually really good to hear. Kira, do you want to, I don't know if we've touched base on what we have talked about as far as, oh, actually, no, I did mention it, but do you want to go in a little more detail about what we talked about more recently?
We can to some degree, I think, because I still feel like it's shaping up. But just to follow up on what you were saying, I actually consciously was trying to avoid the most obvious form of collaboration, because I worked as well with like composers, and I really didn't want to treat this as like, okay, now I have a guy who can write me music. I really wanted to be like, okay, we have two artists. We don't need to be entirely committed to the disciplines that we practice the most. And I want to make sure that we really find something that we both could be very much interested. So, and that was a bit challenging, because if we could have gone the direct road, like it would have been fast and easy, but I don't know if it would have, I don't know. Yeah, I think that was the biggest challenge to me, taking the most time, like trying to understand what is Jonas interested in, what does make him excited, how does he think, how does he come up with ideas, because I think the level of abstraction and whatever is very different in each of every one of us. What else to?
Well, I think that's the good thing about it, because I was hoping that you wouldn't do that. And as I mean by this, I mean I was hoping, and now I know that you're not doing that. That I thought, well, the easiest way to do is to do the music, you'll dance to it, so to speak. But you're not doing that.
Yeah.
So you can bring in a performative element in something which is not performative. It's a bit like if I were to put you in a room, give you canvas and paint, and say, okay, you're not painters and canvas. And I do this with students a lot. I put in a lot of things which I do. I do a nice example where I get them to put a lot of paper on the floor. I mean, these are exercises that many people do in that field, and I get them to play with paint. But one of the things which they do, for example, and then you have to put them out of it, is that they take a little space and they do their own little painting. I say, no, you can't do that. You have to mess around with other people's spaces. So I mean, by doing that medium which they're not familiar with, suddenly, and to be honest with you, even if you have painters, actually, they will go back to their own habits. So you have to break their habits by using that medium. So you could say, okay, let's do a medium which we're not familiar with, in order to be able to bring in what a composer would do with paint, for example. What would a dancer do with paint? I mean, a dancer might smother herself with paint and start dancing around on paper.
Yeah.
It would be great. So, I mean, it's that kind of exercise that you put yourself in a situation which is not comfortable for you, but then you bring in yourself in it as a performer, as a musician, as a painter, but you're not doing what you normally do. So I think this would be great. I mean, that's for me what would be a counterintuitive kind of approach to things. And it looks as if that's what you're doing. So,
yeah.
So,
I would say that.
I'm going to support that.
Yeah, true. But also, actually, I've been, even though it was like all stage work, but I've been working a lot with sound and voice, and I kind of stand-up bits, and of course, like different kind of semi-academic speeches that have sonic effects and hypnotic results and things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't feel it's too alien to my practice to remove, let's say, the visual and commit to the audio as a visual. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, my experience also, I mean, I haven't actually written music for live theater or performative work, so I haven't had the chance to have that kind of interaction before. But I mean, I've done
We can
film.
arrange that.
We can arrange that, definitely. Yeah, we can do
Don't
that.
worry.
Well, we
Why
can
didn't
definitely
you
get
tell
there.
me?
No, no, no. I mean, I've definitely had stabs at it, but they never fully materialized and completed. But no, my closest kind of collaborative experience with other mediums has been motion picture, film, visuals in that sense. But at the same time, it's definitely not the same because that's a stagnant set work, and it's already finished. The motion picture is finished, it's edited, and then I just put on music to it. One thing I wanted to ask, actually, I mean, as a topic, I think I might have mentioned in my email, is also like, what are some collaborations in the past that I don't know if you have thought of?
I mean, I worked mostly, being an academic, and worked in art schools. I worked mostly with students who were arts professionals. So I mean, but I also worked a lot in the interdisciplinary. So for example, just to give you an example, when I teach, for example, courses like philosophies of art or something like that, or critical theory or something. And what I do, I try to kind of use methods, but when I get artists working together more specifically, it is this kind of thing that you're doing, is that you don't just let them do the, obviously if you're the professor, so that you have an element of power and you have an element of setting parameters. So if you're working with artists individually, and that's different because they bring in their own decisions. But I mean, let me call it that as an opportunity. The opportunity that you bring in is that you challenge people out of their own comfort zone. So if they're a painter, you tell them, don't just paint, do something else. So it's the same exercise we're doing here, in order to be able to then come out with something which is really interesting. What I found is that when they present these works, is that obviously the advantage here is that there are themes which I give them. So I mean, for example, I remember one thing which I remember doing, philosophies of the arts, and one session I did a whole session on Garcia Lorca's notion of the duende. And as you know, Garcia Lorca, he was a poet. He was also a drama. He was a theater man. He wrote theater, but also he was a musician. And so that play and theory of the duende, his essay of the play and the theory of the duende, is really fascinating. But I mean, the students actually, some of them kind of didn't know about him, and then suddenly they discovered. I showed them Leonard Cohen's rendition of one of his poems, Waltz in the Viennese Waltz, and they got so fascinated with it. And one group of students decided to present on that, and one of them was a performer, the other one was a ballet dancer. There was another one who was a bodily performer. She used her body to perform, and there were a couple of others who were, they were not painters, but I mean, they just sort of indulged in that. So the thing they put together was really fascinating. I had another group actually that came from drama, that they decided to do a painting by actually using boxing gloves and dab them in paint, and they just punch each other. There was a humorous element in it as well, and they ended up with a painting. So the common thing they did is they decided that they use a medium that brings them together, and it was not necessarily their own medium. So I mean, the idea of collaboration, as you do with people, and I'm sure Kira, who works coaches people, would have that, is that I always think that you need to find a theme, and this, I think you found your theme, which might not be exactly coherent or anything like that. It could be a theme which brings together things which are disjointed, and through that and through the medium of choice or media, if there are different ones, is that they kind of allow that to take them somewhere. So I think it's allowing what you're doing, allowing the material, allowing the medium to take you somewhere and take the risks of it, which you're used to because you're arts practitioners, is the key to collaboration. I always find I've never been asked that, but now that you're asking me, if I think back on how I've seen collaboration happening, and also I've involved with it myself, but also I had others do it for me as their either professor or whatever. I think that's the important thing, is that you help with the theme or help them develop the theme, but also encourage the collaborants, if there's a word, to really kind of allow the medium to take them somewhere, but also to take the risks and be open to it. And I think that's what you're doing. So I mean, and I'm not surprised because you're artists. So I mean, that's what we do.
I actually remember we I don't think we actually really did this, but we talked about doing some kind of like finding some kind of exercises or like ways of getting to know each other, creatively speaking, and just the idea of you mentioning that we should maybe make something together that might be both out of both of our usual practices. I don't know. It might be something we should try to do, Kira. I think that might be interesting, or just.
Do you know what really attracted when I was listening to, because I mean they told me go and look at all the artists, and I like all the projects. Well, one of the things which really attracted me to what you're doing is your initial conversation about swearing. And swearing is really interesting because I'm not sure whether you're very, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Wittgenstein, but swearing is one of the language games he talks about. And it's really fascinating because I think, you know, it's that kind of irreverence again, but also looking at the world in that way and laughing at the world, which really kind of break. And I thought that conversation, when it started, I said, well, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And then I realized, oh, this is going to be interesting. So I was really attracted by it, and that made me listen more to what you were talking about in terms of, and I thought, I wonder how this is going to affect this approach, this rapport is going to kind of come out into a project, because this is really interesting. I'm not saying you should do a project on swearing. That would be nice, but yeah.
I think what followed and that was not recorded, which I always find really nice to see if I ever connect with people. I think we talked about money right after. And I was like, yeah, I also really like money. Like, because it's always fun to find people with who you relate ideologically, and then to be like, and bring it down to reality, and to see like I don't think I am like a massive materialist, but I think it's always fun to play with that notion of pragmatism with other artists. So I think sometimes actually bringing up a topic of money in the context of ideas and artists is as provocative as talking about swears. Yeah. It's like to be like, oh, you know what? But yes,
this accidentality, and if you go back to your project, is this kind of contingent nature of what's happening, that you're open to some of the things which are going to happen, which you don't know what they are, but you're looking for them. You're looking for the error, if you like. You're looking for things which go wrong, and that would really accentuate what you're doing in the project. So I mean, there would be really interesting highlights, almost like nodes, which would connect and then send you somewhere else in a different direction. So I think it's that kind of it. Now, how you then regain control of it and make it work as a work of art, whatever that means, is interesting, because I mean, or just as a work, just as a work. And I mean, that's what would be really interesting in terms of, because I mean, to go back to your question, is when I saw one of the things which is really exciting after projects like these is the continuous evaluation of it. And I don't mean, you know, yeah, I know, because when people kind of give you a lot of money, you have to give them a report. It's not that. What I mean by the evaluation is how you reflect on what you're doing in order to be able then to kind of look at it from a distance and say, okay, maybe it's working, or maybe this is not working, or maybe this is. But I mean, it's that kind of process. And I think that's really important. That's part of the project itself, which is hidden, but I think it's really good as well. So to do. Because you learn from it, and then you can go back out of this. When you go back to your own work, I'm sure you will start looking at your own work in a very different way. So.
Yeah, I don't even know how to look at my work anymore after everything happened. Like, I think a lot of artists, definitely me, I entirely like rebranding, reconstructing their practices these days. Maybe not everybody needs to, but yeah.
That's the thing which I like about arts practice research, and I think we don't do it much, is given the whole idea of how we try to justify the arts to, I don't know, universities, or to gain more presence, and to it's not a question of being appreciated, it's just a question of keeping the arts somewhere. It's also that we don't, as artists, often we don't capture these things and we just leave them. Like even documentation, for example, we don't. The social sciences, they have a way of doing it, and they write their dissertations, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to go, that's boring. But on the other hand, we have ways like these videos and all that stuff where we can capture this documentation. I know if you do a work of music or you do a painting, it's there, it's recorded or whatever, that's it. But it's not that's it, there's something else. These things take a life of their own, and we don't seem to capture that. We're not smart enough, I think, sometimes. We're very good people. I think we're very smart as artists, but we're not smart enough to be able to sell that. I mean, some are, but then you find that sometimes they are too much on the other side. And I think it's that kind of reflection and keeping them and documenting stuff, which is really important. And how that would be archived, like this project, for example, it would be archived, it would be left in this website. And I like that, that aspect is really important. And I find it very useful with students, for example, because I can tell them, look, go and look at that project, go and look at what they're doing, look at the process and how they think about it and whatever. So I think this is really interesting. It could have a different kind of, you know, much more value.
You know, I have another question for you. I'm curious, you see, like, there's almost two very opposite things happening at the same time right now. Like, on the one hand, I'm quite happy with this turn to the digital, right? Like to something that's doesn't so much depend on the community and participation, because let's say with like art openings, theater shows, performances, museum shows, their success very much depends on prestige and participation, right? So like with certain artists is because you are going there to the opening, that's why the turnout is big and the show seems to be successful. The percentage of people who actually connect to the work is questionable, yet the turnout is big. So like great, so check, it works. Now when we're actually going to digital, that means it's very open. Each member of our audiences are alone at home, and their attention span is influenced by YouTube and Netflix more than art shows. Because as soon as there is no community that's holding you down to the chair, there is no anymore patience for like a 3-hour zoom in movie of someone wandering through nowhere. Like, you know, where in the past we could all sit and be like, it made me think of a lot of things unrelated to what nothing it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So okay, so now we have a very positive element, which is the test against the basically pop or like open, like more common culture, right? On the other hand, if to take art for art's sake or art for the sake of developing the inner circle ideas with the largely despised privilege in United States, but that is also necessary. You know, like for instance, even these conversations, they most probably will be boring to 99% of people, but maybe not. I wonder how to stay committed sometimes to something that's not gonna hit the Netflix and YouTube, you know, because that is also important.
Oh yeah.
Because see, like we could have developed those quote unquote boring yet deep things that only like 5 people would understand, but they are also important to exist.
Yeah.
But if now our 5 people, you don't even know if they're sitting. Like, what is the inner quality or what is the strength of the mind of an artist who could actually commit to artworks that you know, that don't have like huge applause?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think actually they're very important. I mean, I always like, I mean, art for art's sake has got a bad name, but I mean, definitely we're talking about also art's autonomy. In terms of art has its own integrity in terms of what it does.
Maybe that's what I mean. Yeah, autonomy. Exactly.
I mean, there is also the danger of it, this whole thing becoming instrumentalized. But on the other hand, given, I mean, if you look at this project, for example, look at how artists are working and look at how we're having this conversation now, because we come from that kind of area and we know that, not that we're special, we just specialize in this thing. I mean, you know, if you ask me to be a plumber, I don't know how to do a plumber. So, I mean, that doesn't make me less, you know, it's just what I do. So, and this is what we do, and we can talk about it. And that doesn't make us elitist. I mean, I think there are some people who try to hop on that horse and they try, as you say, they try to pretend that they know more. I mean, normally I always found that artists who do their work and they are artists, they laugh at these things and they don't care. Obviously, there's this whole idea of you have to have exposure in order to be able to work and in order to be able to live. But I think the way this project has developed, and I mean, looking at all the other, and also the way people have come together almost by accident, because it was like a kind of, people just threw them there by lot. It's interesting in terms of having like an interesting challenge here. Now, obviously we're doing this. I mean, I'm hoping that after this experience of having to use Zoom all the time, in the future, we can use it together with the combination of being together. I mean, what I like about what you did is that suddenly I saw you together and on the roof, and I thought, wow, it's interesting. But I can tell you this, I mean, I told the same thing to the other artists. I feel really strange here talking to you, because I was looking at you and I looked at you as if, and you became like two actors, like I would watch a video or a film on Netflix. And now suddenly I'm talking to the actors, I was looking at their videos. I said, I shouldn't be here, I feel like an intruder now. Well, I mean, it's this kind of thing, but I mean, because I want to watch the next episode now and see what you're doing. And suddenly it's as if I've been privileged to go into a series, and suddenly I told them, well, maybe you should do this, or perhaps we should do that. And then I go away again, and then I sit back and look at you again. So, I mean, I'm looking at this as a beginning of much more of a collaboration, but I mean, definitely. So there is something different from what people are doing on social media. I think this is very differently. And I mean, it's interesting because, so what do you do with 4 artists? You give them Zoom and you give them this, and what do they do with it? And this is it. And I think it's really nice. It's really good. And I'm really excited about it. So, I mean, this is the kind of thing I like about, well, not my job, but my life, because I really engage with this stuff. But as you say, it's very difficult to explain to others unless you just engage with it. It's a bit of an immersive piece, no? So, but yeah. I mean, I hope that this conversation is also helping you germinate other ideas, because I get worried that if we're going to deviate too much. But on the other hand, it seems to me that you do have quite a kind of focused project in terms of focused as in bringing all these things together. And I get the more I talk to you, I get the feeling that this is going to be really exciting. So.
Yeah.
No, I know, and actually, definitely. It's been very helpful hearing you talk again about just having the outside perspective. It does kind of ground us in some form and of our past. So at least for me, I don't know how Kira exactly feels, but
it's very interesting. I'm just so tempted to ask like questions that are not directly related to our project, but more like philosophy. When I'm really trying not to. Like,
go for it. I mean, I don't think anybody's against asking good questions.
No, it's in a way related. What is this weird thing? In a way it is related. But okay, so recently I found a snippet of Hannah Arendt where she talks about, and I just want to hear your perspective since you studied her more than me, where she talks about the private and the public.
Yeah. Right?
And then she talks about the definition of the idiot. That in Greek times, the idiot was a person who only was concerned with their own private matters and would not participate in the society. But Romans reestablished the definition for someone who actually quite the opposite. If someone does not have an ownership of their private life, they are not to be allowed to participate in the public. So in that sense, the idiot was the honorable citizen that can actually participate in the public. So that brings me back to the clown as a political position. And I've been, I was trying, it's been like a while, like I'm still trying to formulate this concept, because I think it could be an incredible cure for, or a back door for hurt liberals. Like to just say like, my political position is the idiot. Because I do consider it incredibly important to not only like go head on into the public affairs, but also hold enough of private. And I think especially with social media and all of the kind of vlogger culture, everything like that, the private has almost none value at all. And that in return brings a lot of concerns, because suddenly everyone has to be political, everyone has to be public. It's almost like a totalitarian obligation to not hold back. See what I mean? So that is where the perversion of not having, even what Hannah Arendt talks a lot about, not having the enough security to private. How does that pervert the whole society?
Yeah, and I think actually what's interesting with Arendt is that she goes beyond this kind of left-right delineation.
Absolutely, yes.
They finished a book about Ivan Illich. I don't know whether you know his work. He's a guy who wrote the Schooling Society, and he also critiqued wrote a book called Medical Nemesis. He was actually a Catholic priest, but then he kind of sort of he was also a public intellectual, and he did a lot of interesting work, and he talks about hope and epithemius and all that stuff. But I mean, I remember reading somewhere from Arendt when she talked about freedom, and also she was talking about the arts, but she makes differences, for example, between visual arts and also the music and performance, and also the whole idea of hiddenness was quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, one of the other things is I remember when I was at Teachers College at Columbia University was there was an old colleague, and she was retired, but she was the star of the place, called Maxine Greene, and she had a whole project. She was also philosopher in residence in the Lincoln Center, and I got to know her and became friends with her, and even wrote a book about her work. And she was very much influenced by Hannah Arendt, but she talked a lot about the whole idea of, for example, I mean, going back to Jonas's question about how she used to do collaborations, which were very interesting. I mean, Maxine, I knew her in her 90s. She became kind of, rather, she lost sort of faculty of her body. So she was mostly in a wheelchair, but she was this brain who would never stop. So basically she died in the late 90s, and she was still holding classes in her salon. She had an apartment just by the Guggenheim, the museum. So I mean, on Fifth Avenue, it was really interesting. And she was like, this big people would just flock to her. And one of the things she used to do, for example, is that once there was this performance of in Lincoln Center, there was this dancer who was dancing, and suddenly the spotlight goes on Maxine, who was sitting in her wheelchair, and she's talking about aesthetics and the whole idea of being wide awake and all that stuff. And suddenly the dancer is kind of reacting to her work, which was quite interesting. But I mean, I think the idea of the idiot and the clown is interesting, because the clown, if you think about the clown as the court jester, how there is the king.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Authority, but the clown is there, and he's the court jester. The king is making fun of him, but actually the clown is also the holder of truth. I'm trying to remember why I read about this. I mean, apart from Dario Fo, I also read something about that. And I remember the thing about the idiot in Hannah Arendt, but I can't remember, I can't place it somewhere. But there is this kind of, but also the obligation of us becoming public when actually we're also private persons is interesting. And in terms of how that's being kind of, because you could argue that we become more and more and more individualist. And we become more and more, but that's not privacy. That's something different. That's egoism almost. It's a bit like, I want to be, I don't care about society. I mean, a private person does not mean that he or she is not engaged with society. It's a different thing. But the forced socialization as well is interesting, as you say, that you have to become public, but public in a very artificial way, because the politics that we play today is very artificial. It's not politics. It's just partisanship. It's like tribalism. It's not real.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's fueled with so much emotion. Yeah. See, like, I think that having enough space and culture of privacy would allow people to sit back and digest before they even go public with whatever they are about to say. Or there would be it's a very interesting deathlock almost that's happening, because we don't have now openings and gatherings and all of that, and the only gatherings is social media. And on social media there is this policing of thought, and then also demand of action, an immediate demand of reaction and action of more or less everyone, especially if you are an artist, if you are a public figure like an artist or comedian or an actor for that matter. And as if you are actually ongoing Colbert Report, like a daily show, like that needs to necessarily like participate in public.
I can send you something which I wrote about this, because I mentioned Maxine, because I remember writing a paper on Maxine and choice, and also how he dealt with Arendt. And I remember when I was writing the paper and I was talking to someone else, and someone told me, be careful, because the idea of choice in Arendt is very different from Maxine Greene in terms of choice.
Yeah.
It's not just a question of empowerment, but definitely the whole idea, and in terms of the arts, it gets really interesting in terms of where choice lies. What sort of choice do you have and what sort of agency do you have? But also, I think this whole idea of the clown decides to choose to be a clown and choose to be, quote unquote, the idiot, in order to be able to do certain things, which gives him more power or more choice than everyone else has. The audience thinks that he is an idiot, but actually he's got more choice to be the idiot. We don't have the choice but to sit there and watch him. And I think it's that kind of sort of where the choice is placed, and what is the real choice, because these days we think we are democratic and we have choice and we can vote, but is that enough? Is that choice, or is that just a semblance of choice? And I think in the arts is the same, when especially when people talk about the arts in education or in schools or whatever, we keep thinking this is kind of giving the kids a choice, but actually the arts are not being used like that. They are used as a subject, just to use it for, I don't know, for something else, to get into university or whatever, if at all. And then only later that it becomes a choice for students, because in a university context, they have a much more freedom to do that. So, I mean, the whole idea of choice in the arts is interesting. Sometimes it's fake, it's not real. We think we have that choice, but we don't. And I think artists, that's why they get into trouble, because they know this and they do it by choice, like the clown, like I mean, and we're all, I mean, I remember reading somewhere, about you mentioned the shaman, the relationship between the clown and the prophet, or the clown and the shaman, and how they're very similar in society and how they operate within society. And sometimes they are exiled out of the polis, they're thrown out of the city. So there's a lot in there. And also the other thing with New York, with this project, is that this is the city. It's a city state, if you think about it, New York City.
Yeah.
And the walls, and what are the walls? And you are roaming about the city. So you can think about that. It's a bit like Socrates being, people made fun of him. He was a bit of a clown, but he was the philosopher. He made fun of life, and then he ended up, in a bad way. So
yeah.
Because he corrupted the youth. So.
There's some few things that actually stuck out to me. Well, first thing is, for me, the idea of the jester being a truth teller, actually, I recognize it in Shakespeare plays and comedies and dramas, where oftentimes the jester is giving the insight of the story and what's going to even happen. But one thing about privacy, which maybe even ties into our project, is that I think, it's very true that today privacy and choosing to be private almost is not an option. And I think it's for me, it's important to have some form of privacy, because I want to test out ideas. I think as artists and creators, like, we actually are very used to that, where we're used to sitting down alone, writing something or creating something without any distraction. Sure, things might be on our mind, but I think that's really important, to have that space of a moment of, I guess you could call privacy, where you obviously are thinking about the things outside in the world, but you're having an internal moment where you're processing everything without criticism, without additional thought influencing you. And I think it's becoming increasingly more difficult. And actually, it's funny, because this project in a way is an interesting amalgamation of that, because Kira and I, we have these conversations. We don't record everything that we talk about. We have long conversations, but still there's an element of we're being recorded and our creative process being recorded. And so and I remember, actually, even Kira was a little cautious because of before meeting you, John, because she was saying, usually we are not, especially in collaborative, two-person projects, we're not used to having a third person coming in and judging our ideas. And actually, I appreciate your approach, because I don't feel like it's been damaging to any of our material, and it's been very encouraging. Absolutely. But no, it's just a really interesting factor in this too, because, you know, I think, again, it's just important to have that space to play around, which I think is becoming increasingly more difficult, because if you make a mistake, either if it's just, it can, like for us, I don't think we've talked about that many controversial, I mean, we've mentioned controversial topics, we haven't delved into them, but maybe like creatively, we've just come up with bad ideas, right? Like maybe I said something stupid that I thought we should do. You know, I said it out loud and it was recorded, and someone might watch the video and be like, he's a dumb composer and he doesn't know what he's talking about. But like, you know, we come up with these stupid ideas, and some people, I don't even categorize them stupid, they're just ideas, but some people might consider them as stupid ideas. But, you know, I think Gustav Mahler, the composer, said, I throw 18 out of the 20 ideas I use, I throw out, you know, and like he didn't have to publicize those ideas and materials. So it's just increasingly becoming more difficult. And I think a lot of people also have chosen to create in public, which we've basically kind of done too, Kira and I. We've chosen to at least take a slice of what we're doing and exposing it to whoever wants to watch us create and go through the process of discovering something. So yeah, I know, I thought I'd tie into that a little bit too.
Yeah. I can follow up with something that I think it kind of relates. It's like, it's a very interesting reversal. Like if you think of totalitarian regimes like Soviet Union, right? It's basically the oppressor is the government, is the outside, the umbrella, right? The firmament is the oppression and the atmosphere. But then you have your friends, like you have your colleagues, you have your core group where like hopefully no neighbors are spying on you, and you can really beef it up, like you even have like Soviet comedy, which like played so well with like double meaning, or like Daniel Charms, I don't know how to say it in English. Like it's almost like it's just like stating the reality, but in a very good, twisted, absurd way. So like the insiders get the joke. So in that sense, like I think it must have been fun for a lot of people back then to like have these insiders and outsiders. But when the reversal is right now, the opposite of like all of the inner circle is policing one another. Yeah. And like with your own friends, you should really watch you didn't say the word whatever. That is very interesting, because the constraint that it creates, where you have to dance around each idea, and like God forsake, you will mistakenly use the wrong words even around your friends. Wow. And actually you could use all of the wrong words around the president. Yeah. So in that sense, for me, Donald Trump is actually a liberating figure. And my group of friends, no, so to say, like my social circle on Instagram is my police. See what I mean? Because Donald Trump is not gonna get me out of the country because I said the word, like, I'm not supposed to say that.
Well, not yet.
He really is not
gonna... He hasn't done it yet, but as of now, yes.
No, but he wouldn't care. He wouldn't care about most of the correct things, you know? So in that sense, like, but also creating online like that, we did have like really funny moments where it's like, okay, so we finished recording. Okay, so what are we doing actually? Like, so what do you actually think? You know what I mean? It's like, I just find it very interesting what's happening with all of that. And I really would love to almost urgently find a way to position myself, a way to create, and almost create concepts within which we could create and find space and freedom. You see what I mean? Like in that sense, yes, the audio, the collage, the contradictory, the all of that, you know, that whatever would actually like release that social pressure.
And
you
it's
know?
interesting because, no, I mean, you're making a very important point. I mean, I keep thinking, I write a lot about things, how we are born or we are actually put in these walls. So, I mean, for example, to have an education, you become schooled. So you have to give up a lot of things in order to play the same game with education until you lose it and you don't want to do that. But then how can you do it intelligently? You can't just drop out. Not, I mean, they quote these people like, I don't know, the guy who did Facebook and all the others as they dropped out of university, his hands there. But those are the few. There are a lot of people who dropped out or never even made it to the schooling, and they found
Yeah.
themselves out on the lip. So I mean, that's not. But I mean, if you think about it, if you can intelligently get out of the system, exit, if you like, I mean, that could be quite interesting, could be quite liberating. But now, is there an outside anymore, or is everything being captured in one big thing? Because as you mentioned, I mean, I can think about. I think I recently watched a couple of films, not film series, which are coming out of Russia, who seem to be kind of showing the Soviet Union in a slightly different way. And I can't remember what it was called, but I saw this series about these young people during, I think it was Gagarin was still there. I think this was before, I'm not sure whether it was after Khrushchev or whatever. But I mean, they showed them as these people who are verging into the illegality. And they were, for example, I didn't know that they used to use these X-ray sort of things to be able to kind of produce pirated long plays. And they used to sell them. And then they used to sell jeans or buy jeans from the tourists and all that stuff. And this whole series was about these kind of sort of illegalities. But in a way, when you look at them, actually, they are trying to beat the system, as you say. But on the other hand, they're trying to be free spirits within a system which does not allow them to do that until they get caught. And that could be quite dangerous. But I mean, as you say, within that kind of context, there's that kind of freedom. But also these people are very, even trying to read a book which is banned, which these days we don't have that kind of concept, is really harsh. So, I mean, you can't.
No, there are things that
I
are
would say
banned,
there
like
are.
almost like, but it's like within our circle of friends.
Yeah.
Like if someone
Yeah.
would see you watch Louis C.K., that you're gonna be horrible.
Or if you read The Art of the Deal, they're gonna Donald Trump's written book, Art of the Deal. Some people might think differently of you or criticize you heavily. There's a social ban, let's put it that way, on certain texts.
I mean,
And it's bigger than being like banned by the government in some sense,
Yeah. Because in a way, if you're banned by the government, you're protected, as you say. If it's this outer crust, then inside you could do all sorts of things. But that's gone now. So you have an oppression which is even more harsh because you can't do anything because everyone knows. So how do you exit that? It's difficult. You can't sort of, because the wall is everywhere, so to speak. And that's interesting because, and I personally find the only space that I have left is working within the arts, doing something like this. Partly because maybe, I don't know, maybe because people don't really bother to try to understand what we're trying to do here. And we're not really precious about it. We do things, we know what to do, we know what a work of art which has integrity is, but on the other hand, we do create that freedom for ourselves. So in some ways, maybe the fact that the arts are marginalized, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's that space you're talking about where people don't take much notice.
No, I think we need to open a nightclub that's gonna be called The Idiots.
That's actually an idea.
Yeah, I think this is our project with Jonas now. We are opening a nightclub.
We've definitely talked about a nightclub. I don't think we've recorded that part.
Yeah.
Kira has mentioned
Jonas,
the nightclub.
I think this is gonna be our speed where we're gonna escape with our group of idiots.
It's actually a great nightclub name, I would say.
The Idiots.
It's actually very good. Yeah.
Let's go to The Idiots. We should do a chain of these nightclubs all throughout the United States. Like where everyone, like the rescue for everyone who needs to reconnect. Guys, I think we are already over time.
Yeah, I have to get going.
I also need to go. Yeah.
I really enjoyed this. I hope I helped you in any way.
Absolutely.
I'll send you some stuff which I mentioned and keep me up to date about this because I really would love to see where you're going with this. And,
definitely.
And if I happen to be in New York, maybe we can meet on that rooftop again. So.
Definitely.
I'm really interested.
You're on our VIP list in the club.
Okay.
First in line.